The Siege. Tales from a Revolution, Virginia. Written by Lars Hedbor. Narrated by Shamaan Casey. Dedication. To the many defenders of liberty who have sacrificed of their own bodies for the preservation of freedom. Chapter 1. Nathaniel Wooster never saw which of the advancing redcoats fired the shot that hit him. The line of enemy horsemen had come close enough to become individual men with distinct features, expressions, and even voices before his commander had given the shouted order to fire. Just after his musket roared in his ear and kicked back into his shoulder, Nathaniel felt as though he'd been punched hard on the arm that supported the wooden stock. The sensation honestly confused him at first, until he realized that his hand would no longer hold the weight of his weapon. He watched the precious musket tumble to the ground from his suddenly insensate fingers, even as his knees began to feel weak. Before he'd even had time to register the pain of the wound, however, the British line was on them, sabers flashing among the hapless American militiamen who still stood. Though they'd been drilled and trained to regard themselves as soldiers, most of them were hardly more than farmers or tradesmen, and none of them had any sense of how to defend themselves against a yard of brilliant, biting steel, descending to slice and tear flesh. As he lay on the ground, his musket forgotten in the mud nearby, Nathaniel had just sufficient presence of mind to perceive that he was one of the lucky ones. The man who'd earlier stood to his left now lay on his back, eyes unblinking to the sky, his neck sliced so deeply that Nathaniel could see the white of bone inside the sagging wound. The man on his right was moaning and clutching at his belly, where the passage of a British saber had sliced through cloth, skin, and guts with equal indifference. Though Nathaniel had seen little action before now, he had no doubt that this would be that man's last day on earth. The redcoat foot soldiers who had followed the cavalry charge were now pushing and shoving against the few Americans who still stood, using their muskets as clubs, and the horsemen wheeled about through the massed Americans, swinging their now befouled sabers in clear menace as they strove with their enemies. Nathaniel heard a grunt behind him, and a British soldier fell facing him, clutching at his chest. The man's eyes locked onto his, and for the space of a few lazy heartbeats, heard as a rush in Nathaniel's ears, and seen as a rhythmic surge of blood between the other man's fingers, they stared at each other. Then the other man's eyes rolled back into his head, and he was still, aside from the slowing trickle of blood into the bare earth beneath him. Soon enough, even that ceased, and Nathaniel willed himself to look away. After what seemed like an eternity of slowing, sporadic gunfire in the distance, and the screams and moans of men nearby and further strewn about the field, Nathaniel heard the cry passed from voice to voice. "Quarter! They've asked quarter! The day is ours!" As he focused on his labored breathing, Nathaniel idly wondered whether the white flag would be honored this time, or whether someone would again violate it and precipitate another round of senseless violence. His thoughts were tending to wander now, though, and he could not seem to hold on to a single thread for very long. His thoughts focused on the awful question of whether he would see his ma again, or watch another sunrise from the top of the bluff back home. He had often enough paused in his morning chores to enjoy the sight that was graven in his mind. He recalled how the purpling horizon gave way to deeper reds than even that which now seeped through his enemy's fingers, finally punctuated by a sudden gasp of brilliant sunlight as the day began. How would this day end? Would he sink into a grateful slumber, or would he find a more lengthy rest in an anonymous grave, accompanied by friends and enemies alike? Would he be reunited with his brother, who had been carried off by the pox so many years before, and would they play their favorite games with hoop and stick in some celestial field? Or would he lay there in this field of carnage, drifting in and out of the world of pain and fear, unrelieved by any sleep, whether eternal or just that of an ordinary night? His stomach lurched at the thought of his ma left.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?